Thank you everyone for joining us at this amazing 73rd annual Latke-Hamantash Debate. Tonight we have with us everyone from debate first-timers to faculty who have been part of the debate for decades. I'm very excited that my Yiddish professor, Dr. Jessica Kirzane, will be on the stage this evening. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm Michelle, I'm a fourth year from Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm a co-chair for the Hillel Student Advisory Board and former Hillel engagement intern with Leah. Tonight is one of the most important days of the Jewish calendar, the Latke-Hamantash Debate. The debate began in the Great Room at Hillel in the 1940s, and now we're glad to be in Mandel Hall celebrating this occasion with all of you.
I'm Leah. I'm Leah, a fourth year from Chicago, and a co-chair also with Michelle of the Student Advisory Board, and I was also a Hillel engagement intern. My dad actually was a debater in 2017 for Team Hamantash, so I'm really excited to see whose argument will be more compelling tonight, too. Over the years, we have had around 350 debaters asking the big, important questions and concluding nothing. The Hillel community is so glad that you could come to be a part of this evening with us. We are especially glad to welcome back Ben Callard, one of last year's participants, back to the stage, this year in the role of moderator. The debate is a classic example of Jewish humor. It models how one people celebrates balancing joy and pride in our culture with the absurdity of the modern tradition. While we can't give the full context of 4,000 years of Jewish history tonight, Hillel's executive director, Rabbi Anna Levin-Rosen, will try. She'll try at least to help contextualize what this debate this year will be all about.
We are very excited to share this evening with all of you, Chicago, Hyde Park, and UChicago communities to continue this long-standing tradition.
Let the debate begin.
Actually, the idea of Jewish protection of the environment goes back to some of our most ancient texts. Commentary on Ecclesiastes shares the following story. When God created the first human beings, God led them all around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said, "Look at my works. See how beautiful they are. How excellent. For your sake, I created them all. See to it that you do not spoil and destroy my world, for if you do, there will be no one else to repair it." The commitment to preservation is part of our story. Even after the first tablets were broken, we still carried them around. What if we ended up needing them? Why waste? The commitment to preserve is part of our story, and the Jewish people have kept this for millennia. We have been reading the same book for over 2,000 years. And when we find really old versions of that book, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, we get even more excited, and we preserve them. We've been reusing, reducing, and recycling old family jokes over and over again. So if you offer us a New Testament, we'll say thank you for offering, but we already have a testament. Why go out and get a new one? So what does this say about the Latke and the Hamantash anyway? Well, we start with the story of Hanukkah. In many ways, Hanukkah was about the rejection of Greco-Roman culture. Not that kind of Greek culture, that Greek culture. In 168 BCE, the ruler of the Syrian kingdom, Antiochus Epiphanes IV, stepped up his campaign to quash Judaism so that all of the subjects in his vast empire, which included the current land of Israel, would share the same culture and worship the same gods. And so, we recognize that the decreeing that the crimes of studying Torah, observing Sabbath, and circumcising Jewish boys were punishable by death. He even sent Syrian overseers and soldiers to villages throughout Judea to enforce the edicts and force Jews to engage in idol worship. They insisted even that Jews keep an extra part of the body that we had always thought we hadn't really needed anyway. We were a modest people back then. The temple of the Maccabees was not the one that we think of today. It may not have been quite as modest as my first student pulpit, Congregation Oheb Shalom in Sandusky, Ohio, now 110 years old, but it was a modest temple. And then entered the Maccabees. They resented Hellenization and they wanted to reject assimilation. The Maccabees, they were in some ways the ultimate conservationists to begin with, like most Jewish rebels. They dressed in simple clothing, they hid out in caves, and they picked the most simple tool to represent themselves, the hammer. So they did with less. The menorah, the 6-branch candelabra, burned olive oil, a natural, non-petroleum, clean-burning oil. We read in the book of Zechariah, this idea of sustainable oil, that the olive trees would put oil directly into the menorah itself. It says in Zechariah, "Then the angel who talked with me returned and woke me up, like someone awakened from sleep. And he said to me, 'What do you see?' And I answered, 'I see a solid gold lampstand with a bowl at the top and 7 lamps on it, with 7 channels to the lamps. Also there are 2 olive trees by it, one on the right of the bowl and the other on the left.'" Zechariah's prophecy was followed by a phrase, "Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit," which effectively should be the slogan of the first fully renewable energy source. So, what is this miracle of Hanukkah that we celebrate? There was only enough purified oil to last 1 night, but in the end, it lasted all 8 nights. That was enough time to create new, clean burning oil to be pressed and purified. We know that olive oil is clean burning, but we might not believe that. It has a low smoke point, so if you've tried to use olive oil to fry latkes, you've discovered sometimes it doesn't work so well. And so, when we celebrate the miracle of the Maccabees, we celebrate that Hanukkah is a holiday of moderation, and getting socks for Hanukkah is essentially one of the core traditions that represents the humility and the preservation, the simplicity of the holiday. So what about Purim? The Purim story begins with a political critique. The new king emptied the coffers of his people on elaborate parties, on wine and women, resulting in financial problems for his country. In fact, the spread of the Persian Empire from Turkey to Ethiopia is symbolic of the environmental degradation that has resulted from colonialism. But that's a different story for another time. So we find that in the Esther story that there were all of these exotic clothing, and that Esther, as part of the harem, she was deprived of all of her basic human rights, but she was also given perfume and nice clothes. Still not okay. The heroes of the story, Esther and Mordecai, lived simply. Esther herself was an orphan. Esther and Mordecai were simple people. And it was their simplicity that they should have continued, because it was the elaborate clothing that was put on Mordecai that made Haman quite so angry. When it was Esther's turn to stand up for her people, what did she wear? Was it an evening gown? Was it a power suit? No. She put on sackcloth and ashes. After all, she knew, from dust we came, and to dust we will return. The 3 commandments of Purim are actually quite short, showing how humble a holiday itself is. It says, we listen carefully to the story. We eat local, meaning gifts to our friends. We have food that we give one to the other, and we give gifts to the poor. We really know that Purim is a holiday of frugality when it comes to the costumes. The theme of recycling. We all know that Purim costumes growing up were just Halloween costumes revisited 6 months later. Even if the glass slippers really don't fit, you still have to wear it again. Or maybe your Purim costume is something a little more DIY. Which brings us to the Hamantashen. If you've ever tried to fill a Hamantash with too much jam, you know that the end result is nothing short of disaster. So the environment is linked to the holiday of Purim and Hanukkah. Now that you know that, you'll begin to see these signs everywhere. So much of Jewish history and our tradition is, in fact, an inconvenient truth, too. But without further ado, let's do a little math. So the grand tradition of the Latke-Hamantash Debate is to include a little bit of gematria. Each Hebrew letter is attributed a number value. And so we will discover what this tells us about our debate this year. This year, we're excited to celebrate our partner Hazon and their efforts to have 5780 be the year of environmental teshuvah. And we are proud that our Hillel has received the National Seal of Sustainability for Hazon for our composting and our green food efforts. So if you look at the word Hazon, you can add up the values of the letters and find that the total is 71. Add 1 latke and 1 hamantash, and you end up with the number 73. The year of this debate is the 73rd debate. And so, when you ask yourself, how did we decide that this was the right year to study environmentalism as part of our debate, you'll see it was in the cards from the very beginning. We revisit recycling. Reduce, reuse, recycle. All begin with R, which corresponds to the Hebrew letter resh, and so 200 plus 200 plus 200 equals 600. And now it gets a little bit more complex. So the Hebrew word Hillel, representing the organization that puts on this debate, the letters add up. 30 plus 30 equals 60 plus 5 is 65, and we add that to reduce, reuse, recycle, and we conclude with none other than this very same number, 665. Hold on. So here's where we begin. We add up the total number for Latke equals 210. Hamantashen equals 455. We add those together, it equals 660. And then we add in the letter He, representative of the eternal, the sign of God supreme. And then 660 plus He plus 5 equals 665, which means that the Latke and the Hamantash debate is equivalent to Hillel, reduce, reuse, recycle. So what is the message that I hold for you tonight? Jewish tradition teaches that we should watch out for our world. So go ahead, carry a metal straw in your backpack. Make sure not to throw away leftovers, and in fact, take your Hillel ball jar out to restaurants with you so you can pack them up in a sustainable container. And do your best to honor our earth. In the interest of this, I will apologize, but not really, for having recycled some of the jokes from past years. Speaking of recycling, without further ado, many thanks to Ben Callard for coming back and serving on our panel again tonight. Thank you, everybody.
Good evening. In 1966, Ronald Reagan, speaking before the Western Wood Products Association in San Francisco, said, quote, "I think, too, that we've got to recognize that where the preservation of a natural resource like the redwoods is concerned, that there's a common sense limit. I mean, if you've looked at 100,000 acres or so of trees, you know a tree is a tree. How many more do you need to look at?" Our topic tonight is environmental protection, and in a moment we'll be hearing from our three debaters about how Latkes and Hamantash fit into the environment and our stewardship of it. But before they approach the podium, let me say a quick word about the answer to Reagan's rhetorical question. I'll enlist the help of three philosophers. On the metaphysical front, we can look to Berkeley, who anticipated Reagan's question 256 years before it was asked. Berkeley never posed the famous question, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? But he did think that the sounds of trees, and indeed trees themselves, are mind-dependent. He was an idealist. He thought their essence consisted in being perceived. As he put it, it seems at first that, quote, "there's nothing easier than to imagine trees in a park and nobody by to perceive them. But what is all this, I beseech you, more than framing in your mind certain ideas which you call trees, and at the same time omitting to frame the idea of anyone that may perceive them? But do you not yourself perceive or think about them all the while? This is therefore nothing to the purpose. It only shows that you have the power of imagining or forming ideas in your mind, but it does not show that you can conceive it possible that the objects of your thought may exist outside the mind. To make out of this, it is necessary that you conceive them existing unconceived, which is a manifest repugnancy." In short, Berkeley retorted to Reagan preemptively from 1710 that someone needs to look at every single tree on pain of them vanishing. Now, you might think that the vanishing of trees is precisely what Reagan had in mind, and that Reagan would thank Berkeley for inadvertently providing a much easier and cheaper method of logging California redwoods. So it seems we must look elsewhere for help. Perhaps the existentialist tradition can come to the rescue. So Sartre once looked at a tree. Here's what he saw. This is one paragraph from a very, very long passage. "The roots of the chestnut tree sank into the ground just beneath my bench, but I couldn't remember it was a root anymore. Words had vanished, and with them the meanings of things, the way things are to be used, the feeble points of reference which men have traced on their surface. I was sitting, stooping over, head bowed, alone in front of this black, knotty lump, entirely raw, frightening me. Then I had this vision. It took my breath away. Usually, existence conceals itself. It is there, around us, in us, it is us. You can't say two words without mentioning it, but you can never touch it. If anyone had asked me what existence was, I would have answered in good faith that it was nothing, simply an empty form attached to things from the outside without changing anything in their nature. And then, all at once, there it was, clear as day. Existence had suddenly unveiled itself. The chestnut tree pressed itself against my eyes. My nostrils overflowed with a green, putrid odor. Obviously, I did not know everything. I hadn't seen the seed sprout or the tree grow. But faced with this great wrinkled paw, neither ignorance nor knowledge was important. The world of explanations and reasons is not the world of existence." We might hear Sartre saying, "You're wrong, Mr. Reagan. First of all, a tree isn't a tree. These categories are mere feeble points of reference which we have traced on the surface of things. And second, it's nearly impossible to face up to the crushing existential burden of looking at even one tree, let alone a forest." But I think Reagan would reply, "Jean-Paul, your example makes my point. First, this one chestnut tree seems to have completely overwhelmed you. The last thing you need is more trees. And second, your whole point seems to be that one tree is sufficient when properly encountered for all possible insights into the universe and its absurdity. Why not cut down the rest?" So we must turn to our third and final philosopher and turn from metaphysics to ethics. So it's safe to say that Socrates was not a nature lover. When Phaedrus chastises him for never leaving the city and going out and communing with nature, Socrates replies, "Forgive me, my dear friend. You see, I'm fond of learning, and the country places and the trees won't teach me anything." We can almost hear him saying, "A tree is a tree. How many more do you need to look at?" And we might conclude that Socrates was a staunch Reaganite on the subject of the natural environment. But this, I will now suggest, would be to miss in the Phaedrus a powerful pro-environment countercurrent. Perhaps the most important idea in the Phaedrus is the contention that we shouldn't write anything down on paper because thought lives in conversation, and one cannot have a conversation with a piece of paper. Of course, Plato wrote that thought down on a piece of paper, thank God, but that's not Socrates' fault. So here's how Socrates put his idea. He said, "He who thinks then that he has left behind him any art in writing, and he who receives it in the belief that anything in writing will be clear and certain, would be an utterly naive person. Writing," Phaedrus, "has this strange quality and is very like painting. For the creatures of painting stand like living beings, but if one asks them a question, they preserve a solemn silence. And so it is with written words. You might think they spoke as if they had intelligence, but if you question them, wishing them to know about their sayings, they always say one and the same thing." Maybe you can see where I'm going with this. So you need one tree for 10,000 sheets of paper, so I just read. Over 100 million metric tons of writing paper are produced each year. 1/4 of all the trees cut down in 2019 will be cut down for writing paper. Therefore, Socrates was, I think, in effect, a tree-hugging environmentalist. He was urging us, contra Reagan, to drastically reduce our deforestation of the planet. All right, that's it for me. So I now have the great pleasure of introducing the first of our debaters, Marc Berman. So he's Associate Professor of Psychology and is the Director of the Environmental Neuroscience Laboratory here at the University of Chicago. In his research, he applies novel statistical and computational models to quantify brain networks and apply those metrics to broader psychological phenomena such as self-control, depression, anxiety, and cognitive effort. He and his lab are also interested in quantifying the physical and social environment to better understand brain-environment interactions and how those interactions can be used to understand human behavior. In particular, Berman and his team are trying to understand why natural environments have beneficial effects on body and mind. Berman received his PhD in cognitive neuroscience and industrial and operations engineering from the University of Chicago in 2010. He's the recipient of the 2018 Association for Psychological Sciences Early Career Research Award, the Nobel Faculty Development Fellowship for Excellence in Teaching and Mentorship, and the 2019 American Psychological Association Early Career Award. His work has been featured in many publications, including the Atlantic Monthly, the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Boston Globe, Chicago Magazine, the Toronto Star, and the Wall Street Journal. An avid latke lover, Berman has decided to give up his love for the delicious Hanukkah treat given the extensive research that he has performed in preparation for this debate. He's hopeful that his words will also change your opinions about the latke, as this may be one of the only ways that we can save our planet and our brains. Please welcome Professor Berman.
So thank you, Rabbi Rosen, for inviting me here to talk about this very important topic that I take quite seriously. I'm actually on a year-long sabbatical right now in Toronto, which I've used to prepare for this debate. And I flew in specifically for this. So if you don't find my arguments compelling, it's not for a lack of effort. So what is environmental neuroscience? Well, let me explain with this very complicated figure intended to give me some academic authority. The gist that you need to take out of this figure is basically that we have an intertwined relationship between our physical environment, our social environment, and our brains, okay? And that's going to be a theme that I'm going to use throughout this debate to demonstrate the superiority of the Hamantash over the Latke in terms of environmental issues. As Ben mentioned, this is quite difficult for me. Given my family's history, the Bermans have an affinity for Käslach, which my grandparents used to refer to, not latkes, they call them Käslach. They said, the Polish people call them latkes, we call them Käslach. And they came from a very potato-loving part of the world near the Carpathian Mountains. My grandfather was from a small town of Barbois that was Czechoslovakia, now it's part of the Ukraine. My grandmother was from Romania, not far away, in a town near Satu Mare, okay? They loved potatoes, they loved Käslach. And after World War II, they emigrated to the United States. They had a family. And one of my family members that they had in the United States is my Uncle Harvey. Now, why am I showing you a picture of my Uncle Harvey? I'm not showing you a picture of my Uncle Harvey because he's a handsome guy, he's got a cool mustache, and he does wear a bow tie. So if you're ever in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and you see a tall guy with a bow tie and a mustache, say hi, he's a really gregarious guy. Okay, I'm not showing you this for these esoteric reasons, I'm showing you this for an important reason, okay? And that is, this is the license plate of my Uncle Harvey's car. I kid you not. I said, Uncle Harvey, I need a picture of your vanity license plate for this debate, okay? So the potato and the Käslach, this runs deep in my soul almost, okay? It gets worse, okay? I get a job at the University of Chicago, okay? I'm meeting my colleagues and friends at the University of Chicago. It turns out one of my dear friends and colleagues at the University of Chicago, you may know her, is Dr. Susan Golden Meadow, okay? She happens to have a dog. The dog's name is Latke, okay? And here is actually a picture of Susan feeding Latke a latke, okay? So you can imagine my distress when I get an email from Rabbi Rosen saying, Mark, we'd like you to participate in the Latke-Hamantash debate, and we'd like you to argue on the side of Hamantash. This was very difficult and personal for me, okay? But I have to say, after doing the necessary research to prepare for this debate, I came up with a new title for this talk, which is How the Latke is Destroying Our Planet, Our Society, and Our Brains, and How the Hamantash can Save Us. It will come as no surprise to you that I've organized the talk in 3 parts. The first part of the talk, I will talk from an ecological perspective and how the Hamantash is superior to the Latke from an ecological perspective. In the second portion of the talk, I will talk from a sociological perspective and how the Hamantash is superior to the Latke in terms of our society and our social environment. And lastly, I'll close with the third portion of the talk, talking from a more psychological and neuroscientific perspective for how the Hamantash is superior to the Latke in terms of our internal neural environment. First, the ecological perspective. Now, as Rabbi Rosen talked about, we have to think historically about why do we eat latkes, right? And we eat latkes because we're celebrating the miracle of Hanukkah. The Maccabees have defeated the Greeks who were desecrating the temple, not allowing Jews the freedom to practice their religion, right? So the Maccabees defeat the Greeks. They go to this temple. The temple is desecrated. They see the menorah. There's only 1 jar of olive oil left, okay, to light the menorah. Okay, and it takes 8 days, approximately 8 days, to press new oil. Okay, they say, let's give it a try. Right? They light the menorah, and miraculously, right, the oil lasts for 8 days. Right, which is why we celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days. Okay, as you can see, I did pay a little bit of attention in Hebrew school. Right, so far so good. Okay, so that's why, right, we eat latkes. Right, we fry latkes in oil. In Israel and even a little bit here in North America, we eat sufganiyot, right? Fried donuts, right? These are delicious treats. Nobody's going to argue how delicious latkes and sufganiyot are, right? But there's a problem, friends, a very serious problem, right? And the serious problem has to do with this celebration and glorifying oil. And that's had downstream consequences, right? So our love of oil, right, has transformed into a huge love of crude oil, right? Right? The Beverly Hillbillies, black gold, Texas tea, we love this stuff, right? And it doesn't come without a price, right? I mean, I hope what I'm about to present is not going to be news to anyone, but crude oil and fossil fuels are destroying our planet, right? The amount of air pollution, the amount of resources necessary to extract oil and fossil fuels from the environment is killing our planet, right? It pollutes our waters and our tributaries, right, when there are oil spills. I mean, this is extremely, extremely damaging. I mean, how can we celebrate oil, right? It's a problem. And we're finding out some things that, you know, we thought we may have learned some lessons from Hanukkah, but they're not actually translating to modern times. So, for example, crude oil and other fossil fuels have proven not to be as energy efficient as the oil used by the Israelites to light the menorah at the temple. Right? We're not getting 8 times the efficiency out of crude oil. Okay? Rabbi Rosen also alluded to another important fact, which was that the oil used to light the menorah was likely olive oil, a renewable biofuel that is more clean burning, and yet we have ignored this fact, right? And what I'm going to show you is that the latke may be partially to blame for this, okay, which I'm going to explain later in this talk. Okay. So I've already demonstrated that crude oil is not having the long-lasting menorah lighting effects that it did in the past. One thing that does persist from the latke is the smell. Okay, and if you've ever cooked a latke before, you are not going to argue with me. Okay, the latke smell persists. Maybe more than 8 days. And I think I need to actually talk about something that happened in last year's debate. So I wasn't able to attend in person, but I watched the video of last year's debate, and I saw my colleague, Dr. Leslie Kay, arguing here last year about how wonderful the smell of latkes is, and that more smell equals more holy. The latke smell is greater than the Hamantashen smell, therefore the latke is superior to the Hamantashen. And I haven't had a chance to talk with Leslie about this, but I'm concerned. Okay? If the latke smell is so fantastic and so holy, why don't we have latke cologne or perfume? Right? I think, right? Right? We should have that. You know, corporations would be all over this, right, if we truly loved latke smell so much. And I think we can resolve this paradox by understanding that latkes smell good for an hour or two, but the latke smell being so strong, it lasts for weeks, and it's really impossible to get out of your clothing, okay? You definitely have to wash your clothes multiple times to get latke smell out of your clothes, and you may also need to fumigate your house. Now, that does not come without a price, okay? This leads to increased water and energy usage, okay? These are conservative estimates that I'm about to present. If we assume that during Hanukkah people will make latkes at least twice, and we can assume that laundry usage will likely quadruple during Hanukkah. So I'm assuming 2 washes per latke cooking, okay, because 1 wash will not do the job. This, of course, causes huge water and energy demands across the globe, right? We're using all this water to wash the clothes, all the energy to dry the clothes, right? And I did some back-of-the-envelope calculations, actually, and this puts the energy usage here of the latke cleaning is on par with Christmas light displays, which can cause huge energy demands in the month of December in North America. In combination with latke smell removal, these traditions threaten the U.S. power grid in the month of December. And I'm not finished, it gets worse. Because all of these calculations were based on only making latkes during Hanukkah, which I think is quite conservative. People eat latkes much more often than just Hanukkah. So we know, for example, that latkes are eaten all year round, and if the Berman family is representative of other Jewish families, you'll know that you definitely eat latkes on Passover, right? And use the matzah meal. You're cooking latkes on Passover. You might also be cooking latkes on Sukkot, and problematically, these are other 8-day holidays, at least in North America, right? Get a little bit shorter in Israel. Hamantashen, on the other hand, are a restricted delicacy of Purim, thereby limiting their carbon footprint and being more environmentally conscious. Right? You definitely don't see people eating Hamantashen all year round, I would argue. Okay? What about thinking about the ingredients that are used to make latke? Okay, and there's a problem here with potato monoculture. So the most popular potato used to cook latke is usually the russet potato. Okay, it's also the same potato that's used in McDonald's French fries. And what happens is that because it's so delicious, this russet potato, and making the latke and French fries, we can't make latkes out of any other potato. This has important impacts on farming, where it becomes monoculture, right? That farmers know, I can only grow the russet potato, and this causes many, many problems. So if we think about monoculture practices, it requires more fertilizer, right? Because bugs start adapting to the russet potato, and farmers need to use more fertilizer, and this gets into our environment and hurts our environment. This also limits the ability of potatoes to undergo natural adaptation, right? We're sort of forcing the potato to stay in this monolithic russet prototype that we require for our latkes. It also encourages genetic modification, which may have huge unintended consequences. So large corporations like Monsanto invest millions or billions of dollars in trying to genetically modify the russet potato to fight against these diseases, right? And let's be honest, it's boring, okay? Now, if we think about the Hamantashen, on the other hand, there are many varieties of Hamantashen, right? You have the strawberry Hamantashen. You have the apricot Hamantashen. You have the prune or Lekvire Hamantashen. You have the raspberry Hamantashen. You have the pomegranate Hamantashen. And you have my kids' favorite, the chocolate chip Hamantashen. So again, you know, even in a cookie, my children refuse to eat fruit. And you can take some creative license with the Hamantashen. Has anybody here ever tried the inside-out Hamantashen, which is dough on the inside, jam on the outside? Don't try it. Okay. Now there's more varieties of Hamantashen. I'm only talking about the sweet Hamantashen, but there's actually a large amount of savory Hamantashen, which I learned from my extensive Google searching for this debate. So there's also the California Hamantashen, which is avocado. There's the caramelized onion and tomato with goat cheese Hamantashen. And there's the spinach Hamantashen. Now, the spinach Hamantashen, this is interesting. This is like a spanakopita Hamantashen, and I have to say, this might be a cheeky way of the Hamantashen to sort of give it to the latke, right? So latke is all about the Maccabees defeating the Greeks. Here we're bringing the Greek into the Hamantashen. Okay, now you might say, Mark, okay, you're being biased here. There are potato latke alternatives. I say, okay. There's the beet latke. I don't know. The carrot latke? I think actually they put some potato in there too for the picture. What about this? The zucchini feta latke. It looks interesting. Okay, I might give that a try. Okay, and while we're on the topic of alternatives, what about baked latkes? You say, Mark, okay, enough with the oil. We'll bake the latke. Come on. Now, I'll grant you this, okay? some of the Latke's problems are a matter of guilt by association. Okay, so we all know you can't eat a latke plain, right? You need sour cream. Okay? But this also comes with problems, right? So where does sour cream come from? That's right, cattle. And cattle make a lot of this. And that has problems. Because the effect of methane from cow manure actually is 20 times worse for the environment than carbon dioxide, okay? And the increase of sour cream consumption during latke eating time creates large increases in methane emissions. In addition, we know that cattle grazing destroys many important ecological things in the environment, vegetation, takes up huge amounts of land, damages wildlife habitats, and generally wreaks havoc on global ecosystems. Okay. That concludes my ecological perspective of this talk. Now let's get into the sociological perspective for the advantage of Hamantash over Latkes. And this brings up another important point and other bad accomplices or sidekicks of the latke that aren't necessarily the latke's fault, but there is some guilt by association here. So, as you may or may not know, one of the games that we play on Hanukkah is spinning the dreidel, right? And the dreidels represent the letters of Nes Gadol Haya Sham, that a great miracle happened there, or in Israel, Nes Gadol Haya Po, a great miracle happened here. And as part of the game, you play with these chocolate coins or Hanukkah gelt, right? And you spin the dreidel, and if it and you put a couple gelt into the pot, and you spin the dreidel, and if the dreidel lands on Gimel, you get the whole pot. Okay? Now there are some problems here, right? Because playing dreidel is gambling. Okay, and obviously we know gambling comes with huge consequences. Okay, and you have to think, is this really what we want to be teaching our children? Right? Okay? And it gets even a little bit worse, which is that also we all want to land on Gimel. We want to take that whole pot of gelt. It's all mine, right? And this actually starts leading to capitalistic values. Okay? And it gets even worse because it creates a vicious cycle. So let's step through this vicious cycle, okay? So the latke glorifies oil, okay? Which leads to our love of crude oil. This, in parallel with our incessant need to play dreidel, encourage us to gamble on our future, right? We say, no, we're going to take these short-term rewards and forget about what's going to happen in the future, right? This also leads to promoting capitalist values of taking profits over the environment, right? We say, oh, they'll fix it in the future, right? Let's take our profits now, which feeds back into the glorification of oil. And this vicious cycle, right, goes round and round and round, which is basically destroying our planet. Okay, what about the Hamantash, right? I can't just beat on the latke, right? The Hamantash must, has to provide some kind of alternative, and I say it does. And Rabbi Rosen alluded to this earlier, which the Hamantash have a good accomplice, right? Mishloach manot, right? You give to your neighbor a package of food, the Hamantash are prominent there, we're sharing, we're creating a better social environment, giving presents to our neighbor. And this leads to my first of 3 holiday recommendations, which is give Hamantash to strangers. Okay, so Nick Epley, who's a professor at Booth, talks about the benefits of talking to strangers, and I would encourage you to give Hamantash to strangers, which will probably spur some beneficial conversation. Now, I don't know how many minutes I've spoken to you, but you may have realized that I've actually been talking to this point about things that I don't actually know anything about, okay? I am not an ecologist in the slightest. I'm a psychologist and a neuroscientist. So I thought I would leave my last point here on my actual field of study, okay, to end on a high note, okay? So if we go to the third point on the Hamantash triangle, let's talk about the psychological and neuroscientific benefits of Hamantash over Latkes. Now, as Ben talked about in the introduction, I study how different environments have different impacts on our brains and our behavior, and one of the environments that we look at is the natural environment and how people can interact with nature, go for a walk in a park, and they show these huge benefits on memory and attention. And one of the reasons why we think we find these effects, and actually you can find these effects even just by looking at pictures of nature, right? You don't actually have to go out in nature to get these benefits. And one of the reasons why we believe that has to do with the fractal structure of nature. Nature has fractal structure. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, here's a Sierpinski triangle, okay? And fractal structure is scale-free, meaning that, you know, it's got a particular shape. You zoom in, same shape. Zoom in again, same shape, right? And fractals are very prominent in nature. So, you know, here's like a tree. It branches out. That pattern goes on and on and on. It's recursive, okay? And let's take a look at this perspective in terms of the Hamantashen. Okay, so here's the Hamantashen. Triangle. Triangle. Okay, now I'm going to need everybody in the audience to squint their eyes. If you squint your eyes, you'll see there's actually another triangle in here. If you squint your eyes even more, there's another triangle in here. Okay, if you take a microscope and you take a section of a Hamantashen, you'll see it's triangles all the way down. And I would encourage you to do this after having a few alcoholic beverages to get better results. Here comes my holiday recommendation number 2. Serve Hamantashen in a triangle shape. Now let's take for a moment, what happens if we zoom in on a latke? Okay, latke. Looks delicious. Circle. Okay, here's a zoom in. Let's blow that up a little bit. I don't see a circle. No. In fact, I see something worse than a circle. I see chaos. Lots of broken edges everywhere. Now, this is important, and this is actually real research that I'm about to present, so don't laugh. We've actually found in the laboratory, if you expose people to disordered images, like the zoom in of the latke, that can actually increase people's cheating. Okay, that people exposed to this kind of disorderly stimulus will increase their likelihood to cheat by 35% and cheat by a larger magnitude, 87%. Here's holiday recommendation number 3. I recommend playing dreidel before eating latkes, okay? This should reduce cheating during latke playing, and we know that, you know, false spins, ooh, I didn't get a shin there, right? This will reduce that kind of behavior, okay? So I'm almost done, no worries here. So my kids love Hamantash, and as I said before, I flew, and this actually hurts me that my kids love Hamantash because Bermans are potato latke lovers, Käselach lovers, right? And I said I flew in here from Toronto and actually found a note from my eldest daughter, and I want to read you a little bit of this note that she wrote me. She left this in my suitcase. She says, "Dear Daddy, I love you so much. Remember, Hamantashen are better, smiley face." So Ali, Karen, and Sasha, my 3 daughters, they all wanted me to say to you that Hamantashen are way better than latkes, and I will tell this to you off the bat. They drew this conclusion even before seeing my talk. Had they seen this talk, maybe they might have changed their mind. But this does give me hope for the next generation. Okay. So in conclusion, from this environmental neuroscience perspective, right, I think I've demonstrated quite convincingly that the latke is destroying the planet, our physical environment, it's destroying our social environment, quite clearly, and it's destroying our brains. The Hamantashen, on the other hand, is showing quite a lot of love for our planet, right? Very environmentally conscious, very socially conscious, and very conscious to our brains. And with that, you know, let's eat some Hamantash this Hanukkah, right? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Professor Berman. For a different perspective, we will now hear from our second debater. Raymond Lodato is an assistant instructional professor in the program on the global environment in the college. He teaches courses on environmental policy, law, and politics, as well as urban sustainability. He's given talks addressing topics ranging from Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si to comparative urban sustainability policy to money in politics. He's the principal investigator of the study of non-voters in America, a study of why eligible voters in swing states choose not to participate in high-profile elections. Professor Lodato received his PhD and AM degrees in political science from the University of Chicago. He came to Chicago for a one-year master's 35 years ago, which means, he notes, either that he's really bad at math or that he hates putting things in moving boxes. Professor Lodato has worked at several positions outside of the academy, but regretfully none of them enabled him to sample and comment on pastries. He lives in Hyde Park with his wife and sons. I had the chance to meet them before the debate, the latter of whom find this biosketch particularly cringeworthy. Please welcome Professor Lodato.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for the kind introduction. I'm extremely flattered by the invitation from Rabbi Rosen and Hillel. I am always up for a good debate. One that takes on the big questions is especially juicy for me. What's our purpose in life? How do we make big political changes? Are small political changes building blocks or useless half measures? And of course, this one. Also, I am happy to be, for once, on what is likely to be the winning side. You see, I'm a lifelong fan of the New York Mets, which has steeled me to believe that winning is only an occasional thing, not to be expected, and one to which there is an element of surprise. Is this going to play? Oh, it's not playing. Well, it's a great video. I am by training a political scientist and one quite interested and even active in the political process. At my minimum, I vote. And while the record of my candidates is better than that of my baseball team, even when they win, they don't always take office. So being on the winning side of anything, as latkes are likely to be tonight, or so I'm told, unlike every other Chicago election, apparently I only get one vote here. It is quite unusual for me. But while I revel in my good fortune, I am charged with exploring the positive environmental qualities of this delicious treat as well. You might think that environmentalism and potato pancakes have nothing in common, but as Richard Nixon said after remembering that the microphones were on, that would be wrong. According to the most recent report by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, entitled, "We All Screwed Up the Planet Really Badly and Things Are Going to Get a Lot Worse," at least I think that was the title, food waste is one of the major contributors to climate change. Climate change and land, that's the actual title, so close. Food waste alone contributes 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. 25 to 30% of all food produced goes uneaten, adding up to 1 billion tons of wasted food. Food waste would be the third biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions if it were a country. The panel recommends cutting food waste in half by 2030 if we are to have any chance of keeping global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. To the rescue comes the latke. Now, that may surprise you, especially if you have a lot of experience eating latkes or watching them be prepared. But sometimes the best conclusions are reached by those who come to a question without knowing what the heck they're talking about. A role I have been chosen to fill tonight. At its base, of course, the latke is based on the often maligned potato, of which I am keenly familiar. As the grandson of Patrick Michael Casey of County Mayo, the potato and I have a long acquaintance. What's environmentally better than a potato, you ask? No, the question is, what could possibly be better for the environment than a potato? The IPCC and climate scientists worldwide acknowledge that our chances of mitigating climate change are rapidly diminishing, and we are living in an era of adaptation, when being flexible and dealing with the effects of climate change is required. What could be more flexible than the potato? Let me give you a personal illustration. In a visit to my grandfather's town in the west of Ireland, I innocently ordered a side of baked potato to go with my fish entree. The waiter's puzzled expression didn't register with me until the meal was served, when I found no less than 3 forms of potato on my plate, baked au gratin and fries. The other 2 were standard. Who knew? What is it that the potato can't do? It comes in a hearty tube size, but it also comes in a tiny rounded size, sufficient for eating or tossing at politicians. It even comes in a sweet variety for those whose taste buds have given up on life. Yes, my controversial food opinion this week is that sweet potatoes are overrated. Potatoes are so adaptable that they even consent to live in Idaho, of all places. They get along with everyone. They are actually the Mr. Rogers of foodstuffs. Potatoes are a food so adaptable that they are tailor-made for an age that will require us to literally head for the hills as sea levels rise. And no, I don't have a picture of the plate with the 3 kinds of potatoes on it. I know it's hard to believe in 2019, but in the past, we simply ate our meals rather than asking them to pose. But it is not merely potatoes that meet our environmentalist standard of adaptability. In fact, adaptability is a characteristic of many of the latkes ingredients. Now, some have alleged that cooking oil used to bring latkes to peak crispiness is environmentally unsound. But like so many predictions of this year I'll finish writing my book, that would be wrong. The use of oil in latkes is not only practical, but calls to mind the oil used after the liberation of the temple, which was enough for 1 night but burned for 8. What better example of doing more with less, a true necessity in today's climate, than stretching out the fuel to last longer than it should? Or in today's parlance, using oil once, even with the purpose of making delicious latkes, is, how shall we say it, definitely okay boomer territory. Cooking oil can not only be used again, but it can be recycled, a crucial part of creating a sustainable economy. For example, used cooking oil can provide fuel for biodiesel projects. What could be a better example of adaptability than driving to work or school using the oil that prepared our favorite Hanukkah treat? Our colleagues at Loyola University will accept tax-deductible donations of used cooking oil for a biodiesel project of their own. No one said recycling couldn't be tasty as well. And who ever heard of recycling a Hamantash? What would that even consist of? The mind reels. I would be remiss if I didn't extol the environmental benefits of eggs, an essential element in the preparation of latkes. The health benefits of eggs are almost too numerous to mention. Recent research on the effect of eggs in increasing cholesterol has modified the original findings that made them a food pariah in the 70s and 80s. With no disrespect to the potato, if there is one food that exemplifies sustainability, it's eggs. The fact that they help produce such a delicious product as latkes only makes their case stronger. And there's science to this. A 2018 study found that a dozen eggs has a carbon footprint of 2.7 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is much lower than that of veal, pork, or lamb. Salt, which those of us of Italian heritage know is always preceded by the words needs more, is not only an essential ingredient in the production of latkes, but has its own element on the periodic table. Can Hamantash say that? I think not. Wars have been fought over salt, and not just in ancient times. The El Paso Salt War, which occurred in the 1870s, was one such conflict. In the aftermath of the Civil War, a dispute developed in southern Texas as to who had the right to mine salt from local lakes. Local residents favored a continuation of the policy of community ownership, but the arrival of a band of early neoliberal consultants, I meant persons with an entrepreneurial bent, forgot where I was for a second, insisted on individual ownership. Prior to that, cutting off salt production and supply routes was a major part of Union strategy during our Civil War. Salt flavors our food, preserves it, and even kills bacteria. The utility of salt, for which I do not, unfortunately, have a fancy economics graph to illustrate, is nearly endless. Who would go to war over Hamantash? The most bloodthirsty general imaginable would look at a proposal to cut off the supply signs for Hamantash and say, meh, let him have it. It would be the first war ever canceled on the basis of boredom. But maybe that's a good thing. And speaking of flavor, please let us consider the onion, another key ingredient in the production of latkes. The onion, like the potato, comes in a multitude of varieties. Of course, its best usage was as a name for our city and our beloved university. The term Chicago, meaning land of the smelly onion. One can only imagine the culinary tastes of Jean-Baptiste Pont de Sable, the modern founder of this locale, as he told his friends and family about the real estate deal he had just made. Yeah, smells like onions, but it's a living. Given our winters, one can only imagine what the other locations that he might have considered smelled like. Our investigation of the environmental superiority of the latke comes not only in terms of how it is used, but how its ingredients are produced as well. After all, the environmental impact of food production is a major factor in plans to address climate change. Here, onions rise to the top of the list. Not only are they a flavorful addition to many dishes and come in several varieties, but in a 2017 study of the environmental impact of vegetables in the U.S., Fairburn found that production of onions appears to produce the least carbon footprint, as opposed to all the other vegetables collected, followed by potatoes and carrots, using the coefficients determined in a study by the University of Naples, Federico II. You'll note our friend the potato makes another appearance here. Even accounting for the transportation of these vegetables, Fairburn found that yes, air quality will be affected, but it is likely that this effect is minimal compared to pollution generated from cars and automobiles or businesses and factories. Finally, there's water. Water is not only essential for life, but it is likely to be the key factor in determining the effects of climate change. Some areas will suffer from its lack in the form of desertification. Others will be inundated by sea level rise. It's been nice to know you, South Florida. In order to deal with the latter situation, it is our responsibility, no, our actual duty, to make latkes in great quantity and use as much water as is called for. I could go on. After all, what is a latke without toppings? Okay, delicious nonetheless, but still. I understand that applesauce and sour cream are two of the most common toppings for latkes, and both have their strong points. Their tastes are radically different, and I'm sure there are environmental benefits for each. The fact that the latke can accommodate either topping cements its superiority to the Hamantash, which is actually a fine treat if you like overcast skies and watching your laptop load files. But let me conclude by stepping out of my professorial role here and declare that the environmental impact of applesauce is only positive because it's delicious and one of my favorite treats. There will be no discussion of this assertion, and points will be deducted for any attempt to offer a differing opinion. So in conclusion, we end where we began, with the latke in ascendance for all kinds of good environmental reasons. Thank you very much.
All right. And now for our evening's third and final debater. Jessica Kirzane is Assistant Instructional Professor in Yiddish in the Department of Germanic Studies, where she teaches all levels of Yiddish language as well as courses in Yiddish culture and literature. She's the editor-in-chief of In Geweb, a journal of Yiddish studies, and has held several positions at the Yiddish Book Center, Translation Fellow in 2017-2018, Pedagogy Fellow in 2018-19, and as an editor and contributor to the Teach Great Jewish Books site of the Yiddish Book Center. Her research interests include race, sex, gender, and regionalism in American Jewish and Yiddish literature, and she's published articles on the idea of rural America in Yiddish literature, interethnic romance in Yiddish periodicals, and lynching in American Yiddish literature. She's made many translations from Yiddish, including works by, I've already I'm going to mangle these names, Jens Serdatsky, Leon Kobrin, Rosa Palatnik, Joseph Opotoshu, and Hava Shapiro. And her translation of Miriam Karpelov's The Diary of a Lonely Girl or The Battle Against Free Love is due to be published next month. Is that right? Further from her professional work, but closer to tonight's topic, she also co-authored a teaching guide to the matzo ball in American Jewish history and culture. She received her PhD in Yiddish studies from Columbia University in 2017. She has 2 children, Jeremiah and Esther, and is married to a rabbi who is here tonight. Please welcome Professor Kirzane.
Much better. I appear today as a swing debater, and I have to admit that this also marks my very first time even attending an official Latke-Hamantash Debate at the University of Chicago. But as a Yiddish studies scholar, I am no stranger to the nuances, the ethnographic concerns, the historical contingencies, the questions of labor and gender, rabbinic and lay authority, the language politics, the tensions that cut to the heart of the history and the present-day experience of Jewish life, and that are central to this very significant question of Latke versus Hamantash. And, of course, as most scholars of Jewish literature and history know, Latkes and Hamantashen have long been central to Jewish debates about the relationship between living beings and the world in which they live. As a swing debater, I will remain a neutral party to the debate, but I want to offer you some words of caution about the Latke with relationship to its role in the biosphere. The first thing that you need to know is I did a little digging in the archive to verify that Latkes are not exactly good for the biosphere. In this poem, which I'm sure you all can read, published in the Gronder Moment Express in 1929, we read, "Nur ein Chesuren haben Latkes, von nur a langer Zeit, wo sehr reich Paskudener spürt sich von wie weit." I probably don't need to translate. This is, after all, an educated crowd at the University of Chicago. But just in case you didn't catch that, and if you didn't, can I recommend taking a Yiddish language class with me? What I said was, there's only one disadvantage to latkes, and it's that no matter how far away you are, you can detect their disgusting smell for a very long time. So, I know that poetry needs to be interpreted, and that, of course, translations sometimes offer different shades of meaning than the original text, but let me offer you a close reading of this particular moment in the poem. Latkes are damaging to the biosphere. Latkes cause air pollution. Latkes are gross. I'm sure you're all familiar with this relatively obscure pamphlet titled Sankum, a publication of children's stories in Yiddish from the Soviet Union. So there's no need to explain the stories in any detail, but in case you need a refresher, in it there's a poem about a girl named Sanke who was punished at school for her messiness and general lack of hygiene. We learn that there's a reason she is deficient in personal cleanliness, and that is that earlier in the morning, she was too busy trying to defend her freshly made latkes from her mischievous cat, who was trying to eat the latkes, and so she didn't have time to wash up. What's more, as her time started to run short, desperate to keep the cat away from the sweet, fresh, oily fried potatoes, she took the cat out back and beat it with a stick, thereby upsetting her little sister, who inexplicably seems to care more about the cat than the latkes. What we see here is clear evidence that the latkes are the cause of a disruption in the relationships between human beings and the natural environment. Latkes tempt the cat to eat a food that would not be of interest to the cat in the wild. Latkes provide an instance of excessive animal abuse. Latkes force Sanke to come to school smelly and gross and disrupt the school environment as well. But to be more serious and more damning, we come to a story in the Radomer Kelze Leben in December 1934. In the story, 2 men enjoy platefuls of latkes, though complaining that they aren't the same as the good old days when latkes were made with rendered goose fat. They explain, it used to be that latkes were simple and easy. You ate latkes, you dipped them in rendered fat and flour and sugar, but now latkes are something else. We have Latkes Pentakes, beggars latkes, nothing but paupers. Now every one of us is a latik, a tramp, a beggar, or thief that gets dipped in pain and woe. In short, life is full of latkes. The whole world and its Hitlers are nothing but latkes. So I won't tell you which side of the debate I'm on. I'll just leave you with that thought. Hitler is a latke. Latkes are like Hitler. As I spend a few minutes talking about the delicious cookie we know as the Hamantash. This is one of my favorite Yiddish songs, and though my Yiddish students will attest that I say that about every Yiddish song. Do I have any Yiddish students in the audience? Woo! Yeah, small but mighty. Yiddish students, please sing along. The chorus goes, Hopp meine Hamantaschen, hopp meine Weiße, hopp mit meiner Hamantaschen, hopp passiert am Meise. In the song, a girl sets out to make Hamantaschen, and they turn out terribly, half raw and half burnt. And she goes ahead and gives them to her aunt anyway, because even when they are awful, everyone loves Hamantaschen. More to the point, I am here to tell you that Hamantaschen are good for the biosphere, even though, of course, latkes themselves aren't particularly spherical. Like a diligent researcher in Yiddish studies, I turned to this Purim encyclopedia, published in 1960, to give me a better sense of what I should be considering with regard to the Hamantash. There I found this delightful poem, a Hamantash mit Mon, which means a Hamantash stuffed with poppy seeds. It begins, Meg ich a viele sein wie Urim, stell ich alles in Kon, weil bei mir is heint Purim und will a Hamantash mit Mon. Should I translate? No matter how poor I am, I put what I have into the circle because it's Purim, and I want a poppy seed Hamantash. Okay, so already, if we're talking about the biosphere, we're on solid ground here with circles, and also with the equality of everyone having something to eat. It continues. Let others here eat a steak with horseradish or fat chickens with kosher dressing. Their teeth will have to work at it, and I don't care for that. Let others enjoy their turkey or fat hen. That doesn't appeal to me because what I want is a poppy seed Hamantash. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. I just told you that a good latke is made with rendered goose fat, but here we have a poem advocating vegetarianism through the eating of Hamantashen. The poem continues. These days, there are thousands of anti-Semites, everyone with his own bloody flag. These criminals, these enemies, are as numerous as poppy seeds in a Hamantash. But I come with triumph into the shul with my friends, and I am glad, and I enter with pride. I am happy today, and everyone looks at my joyous face that shines as bright as the sun while I eat my poppy seed Hamantash. The housewife is ready to do anything to fight the onslaught of today's Hamans, but she doesn't prepare a victory wreath made of flowers. What she makes is Hamantashen with poppy seeds. What we see here, clearly, is not only the Hamantash as the symbol of Jewish pride, that would be too easy an argument to make, but the Hamantash as a symbol of preservation of nature, protecting those flowers that might be made into a wreath instead of making a delicious, environmentally friendly treat for the kids to enjoy. But the strongest argument that I have to make that Hamantash is good for the biosphere is one that gets into the nitty-gritty, or perhaps the hanky-panky, of linguistics. You may know that the word Hamantash comes from mon-tash, mon meaning poppy seed and tash meaning pockets, describing the cookies people ate for the holiday. Because of the similarity between the word mon, poppy seed, and Haman, the name of the villain of the Purim story, there was a name change that later led to all those silly explanations that the triangular cookie represents Haman's ears or hat or what have you. But did you know that the Hamantash, together with other triangular foods like the knish or the pierogi, are also Yiddish slang terms for the human vulva? Hamantash is a kind of cute way of referring to a woman's genitalia. And the many poppy seeds stuffed inside the cookie may evoke an idea of fertility. What I'm trying to do here is not scandalize this esteemed audience with a Yiddish vulgarism depicting the female anatomy. Okay, maybe I am trying to do that a little bit, but also to place the Hamantash in an eco-feminist context. Ecofeminism is, in short, an activist and academic movement that sees critical connections between the domination of nature and the exploitation of women. By lifting up a symbol of female fertility, like the Hamantash, as good for the biosphere, I am suggesting that we celebrate female anatomy and the power of women as a way of resisting the exploitative dominance between men and nature and restoring fertile ground. So, to summarize, latkes are like Hitler, and Hamantash, for all that they are associated with Haman, are really about saving the beautiful and fruitful Mother Earth. In my great respect for the long history of this debate, I have attempted to be extremely even-handed and to offer valid points from both perspectives. I assume it may be impossible for you to know where I stand on the issue of latke versus Hamantash, or what I think your bubby would have to say about the question. I leave it to you to decide.
I wanted to thank everyone so much for coming this evening, and it is a pleasure and a privilege to share the stage with two alumni who have shared this stage in years past.
Yeah, I don't need that. Thank you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much again for coming tonight. We really appreciate everyone making their way out here right before Thanksgiving. My name is Rachel Scheinfeld. I graduated from the college in 2016.
And my name's Max Grad, also an alum of the college from the class of 2017. It's really exciting to be back on the stage with Rachel. Back in 2015, together we were on the same stage as co-presidents of the Student Leadership Initiative at Hillel, and it's amazing to see how much Hillel has grown over the past couple of years.
Today, both Max and I are board members of UChicago Hillel, and having the opportunity to continue to serve this community has truly been an honor. While we were students, Hillel was not only a place that allowed us to build lifelong friendships, but provided us a space to really learn and grow together.
Hillel's mission is to provide opportunities for students to connect with Jewish life, culture, rituals, ideas, and most of all, friendships. Our goal is to provide students with a home away from home, not only during their time here at UChicago on campus, but also post-graduation. We do this by making sure that every voice that walks through Hillel's doors is recognized and valued. Just as the Maccabees were part of the miracle of providing plenty of light with very little oil, Hillel here at UChicago manages to serve hundreds of students, as well as graduate students, alumni, and faculty every year on the budget of a small nonprofit. We can't do this meaningful work without the support from parents, alumni, and faculty to achieve our ambitious goals.
We would like to thank all of those who purchased a ticket for tonight's event that helped to make it possible, as well as Arthur Elstein, Jeff and Catherine Wolf, Manny and Marcy Brown for sponsoring this year's debate. If you are interested in sponsoring the Latke-Hamantash Debate in the future, please feel free to reach out anytime. Whichever side you favor, Latke or Hamantash, we know that the real conclusion of tonight's debate is that our campus is lucky to have such a thriving Hillel that makes these events possible. Contributing to Hillel is an easy way to ensure events like this debate continue to happen. If you have enjoyed tonight's program and want this room full of amazing students to have access to impactful Jewish events, internships, and opportunities throughout the year, please make a meaningful contribution tonight. Pledge cards will be available on your way out, and there's a donation tab on our website, uchicagohillel.org.
Thank you to all of tonight's participants. Very well debated. Carl Fogel, who is celebrating his 22nd year on the piano, for his accompaniment this evening. He told us in confidence earlier tonight that he's hoping to make it to 50 years and then might hang up the hat after that. Also, thanks to UChicago Creative for recording tonight's debate. Thank you to the staff here at Reynolds Club and all the Hillel staff and the student volunteers who made tonight come together. Thank you to Joelle Suarez, who is the real secret to tonight's success, even though she won't admit it. And last but not least, many thanks to all of you, the audience tonight, for making the 73rd annual Latke-Hamantash Debate a huge success. Before you get up to leave tonight, as I'm sure you are eager to do, please remain seated until we escort the esteemed debaters out of the hall. Thank you all for coming, and on behalf of Rachel, myself, and UChicago Hillel, we want to thank you all for coming and wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.